My brother claimed he had changed. But on Super Bowl Sunday, he slammed my son into a table and sent him to the ER. After I took action, he ended up in prison. The smell of charred burgers and fresh-cut grass will never feel the same to me again. Because that was the exact moment I watched my own brother strike my 11-year-old son so hard that blood started pouring down his forehead, and then turn around and grab his own 9-year-old boy by the hair like he was nothing. Let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Ethan. I'm 41, a software developer living in Denver with my wife Claire and our son Lucas. And what I'm about to tell you happened on Super Bowl Sunday earlier this year. The day I finally understood that some people are such talented actors they can fool an entire family for months without anyone catching on. It started with a phone call that morning around 8:30. I was standing in the kitchen making coffee when my dad's name popped up on my screen. Thomas Miller. I picked up, and his voice was brighter than I'd heard it in a long time. He said, "Ethan, bring Claire and Lucas over this afternoon to watch the game. The whole family's getting together." Then his voice dropped lower, almost like he was sharing a secret. "Ryan wants to see everyone. It's been 7 months, son. He hasn't caused any trouble. He's completely different now. It's time for the family to reconnect. Ryan." Just hearing that name made my grip tighten around my coffee mug. Ryan is my younger brother. He's 35. And for most of my life, I wanted to believe he'd figure things out, that he'd become the man I always hoped he could be. He was smart, quick, charming when he wanted to be. But somewhere along the way, he chose a different path. It started with online gambling. A few $100s here and there, just for fun, he said. Then a few thousand. By the time I found out how bad it had gotten, he owed close to $42,000, most of it to those predatory high-interest online lenders. But the money wasn't even the scary part. When Ryan lost big or had a few drinks in him, he became someone else entirely. He'd lash out at whoever was closest, and usually that meant the kids. My son Lucas once got his ear twisted so hard it turned purple, just because he accidentally knocked over a glass of water while Ryan was checking his betting scores. And Noah, Ryan's own 9-year-old son, would shrink into himself whenever his dad raised his voice. Looking into that kid's eyes, I could tell he'd been through more than any child should ever have to experience. Then, about 7 months before that phone call, everything fell apart. Ryan got arrested for disturbing the peace and fighting at a casino on Federal Boulevard. Dad had to bail him out at nearly 3 in the morning. That night, Dad gave him an ultimatum: get help or get out. For the first time in his life, Ryan agreed. He enrolled in anger management classes in Aurora and joined a gambling support group. And slowly, we started seeing what looked like change. He called everyone in the family to apologize, including me. He got a part-time job at an auto parts store. Dad kept telling me every time we talked that Ryan was different now, that he didn't gamble anymore, didn't drink anymore, that he'd never seen him so calm. I wanted to believe it. Who wouldn't want to believe their brother could change? After I hung up with Dad, I turned to Claire. My wife works as a pharmacist at Walgreens. She's the type of person who doesn't say much, but sees everything. When I told her about Dad's invitation, she paused, her face uncertain. She said slowly, "I don't know. Something still doesn't feel right to me. But if you think we should go, then we'll go." Lucas was standing in the kitchen doorway. He'd been listening the whole time. He's 11, small for his age, and so kind-hearted that I sometimes worry about him. When he heard his uncle's name, he stepped closer, worry written all over his face. He asked quietly, "Is Uncle Ryan really different now, Dad?" I remember the last time His voice trailed off, but I knew exactly what he was thinking about. I crouched down to his level, put my hand on his shoulder, and told him that Uncle Ryan had gone to therapy. That Grandpa said he was completely different now. That everything would be okay. I said those words to Lucas, but I was really trying to convince myself. Giving someone a second chance is the right thing to do. That's what I've always believed. But some people don't change. They just learn to wear better masks. We drove from Denver to Dad's place in Lakewood, about 30 minutes on West Colfax. The whole ride, I kept glancing at Lucas in the rearview mirror. He sat quietly, hands folded in his lap, staring out the window. When we stopped at a red light near the Sheridan intersection, I turned around and told him, "Lucas, stay close to Mom and Dad today, okay? If you feel uncomfortable at any point, tell me right away." He nodded. Then his face brightened a little as he remembered something. "Dad, will Noah be there today?" I nodded. The two boys are only about 2 years apart and have been close since they were little. If there was one bright spot in all the chaos my family had been through, it was the bond between those two kids. We pulled up to Dad's house around 2:30 in the afternoon. It's a single-story home at the end of a quiet street, with a big lawn and a detached garage on the left side. Everything looked peaceful, normal. For a moment, I almost forgot why I'd been avoiding this place for the past year. Then the first surprise happened. Ryan walked out the front door to greet us. In 35 years of being his brother, Ryan had never once come to the door to welcome anyone. He was always the type to sprawl on the couch and wait for people to come to him. But that day, he stood on the porch with a huge smile and his arms spread wide like he was about to embrace the whole world. He walked up to me, pulled me into a tight hug, and said, "Big brother, thanks for coming." I patted his back awkwardly, not sure what to say. Then Ryan let go of me and crouched down in front of Lucas. My son automatically took a half step back, but Ryan didn't seem bothered. He looked at Lucas with gentle eyes I'd never seen on him before. He said softly, "Lucas, I'm sorry for the times before. I was wrong. I promise I'll never act like that again." "Okay." Lucas glanced up at me, silently asking for permission. I gave him a small nod. The boy looked back at his uncle, pressed his lips together, and nodded quietly. Right then, a small figure came flying out of the house. Noah, Ryan's son, ran straight up to Lucas and threw his arms around him. "Lucas, you're finally here. Come play football with me in the backyard." I stared at Noah, amazed at how different he seemed. Gone was that distant, guarded look he used to have, eyes always cast down, trying to stay invisible. Now he was grinning from ear to ear, cheeks flushed, bouncing with energy like any normal 9-year-old should. Dad stepped onto the porch behind us, put his hand on my shoulder, and said with satisfaction, "Told you so. He's completely changed. Just trust me on this." Claire stood beside me, taking everything in. She leaned closer and whispered, "I'm starting to believe it. Maybe we were too worried." The afternoon went exactly like a family gathering should. Dad grilled burgers in the backyard, the smell of meat and charcoal filling the air. People laughed and talked loudly. The pre-game show played on the TV inside. Lucas and Noah chased each other across the yard with a football, and their clear, happy laughter made me finally start to relax. But about an hour later, the mood began to shift. Ryan's old friends showed up. 4 or 5 of them, guys I recognized from the old days, the ones who used to sit around gambling with him. They brought cases of beer, slapped each other on the back with loud jokes, and took over the couch in front of the TV. At first, Ryan was holding a can of Coke. Then one of his buddies shoved a beer into his hand, laughing and saying something I couldn't quite hear. Ryan hesitated for just a second before popping it open. "Just one," he said. Maybe to his friend. Maybe to himself. But 1 became 2. 2 became 3. And then I noticed something else. Ryan started checking his phone constantly. Every few minutes, he'd stare at the screen, his fingers swiping, his brow furrowing, his face getting tighter and tighter, his jaw clenching. I didn't need to be a genius to figure out what was happening. He was gambling. Right there at the family party. 7 months of therapy, 7 months of supposed transformation, and all of it was just a performance. Claire noticed before I did. She pulled me into a corner of the kitchen, her eyes locked on mine. She whispered urgently, "I see it. He's gambling. Look at his face. It's exactly like the old days. We need to leave. Right now." I nodded and glanced out the kitchen window. Lucas and Noah were rolling around on the grass, laughing wildly about something. I couldn't stomach the thought of ripping my son away from that moment of pure joy. I said quietly, "Give the kids another 20 minutes. We'll slip out without making a scene." I thought 20 minutes wouldn't matter. But for a gambling addict who's losing money, 20 minutes is an eternity. And in those 20 minutes, everything fell apart. I found out later that Ryan had lost over $9,000 in just 3 hours of sitting there quietly with his phone. $9,000. 7 months of treatment, gone in an instant. When the game hit halftime, the air in the living room felt thick and suffocating. Ryan kept gripping his phone, his face twisted with tension. Then he stood up abruptly, grabbed a few more beers, and walked out to the back porch. Maybe he wanted to escape everyone's eyes. Maybe he wanted space to watch the numbers on his screen devour him. From where I stood near the kitchen door, I could see him settle into a plastic chair on the porch, the case of beer right under his feet. His eyes were glued to his phone, finger constantly swiping. With each swipe, his face changed, strained, then pale, then angry red. One of his friends wandered out to the porch, slapped him on the shoulder, and laughed mockingly. I only caught pieces of what he said. Something like, "Hey, thought you quit. Already lost big today." Ryan gritted his teeth and growled, "Shut up." The guy raised both hands in surrender and retreated back inside. Ryan sat alone, his hands shaking as he downed his fifth or sixth beer. I looked at Claire. She nodded. Time to go. We walked into the kitchen and started quickly washing up a few plates to be polite. Claire was rushing through the dishes, and I turned around, about to go outside to call Lucas. I looked out the kitchen window and saw Noah standing in the middle of the backyard, football at his feet, about 30 feet from the back porch. He was grinning ear to ear, calling out to Lucas. "Watch me kick it hard, Lucas. Can you catch it?" Lucas stood across the yard near the fence, both hands raised, ready to catch. Noah backed up a few steps to get momentum. He ran forward, swung his leg, and kicked with everything he had. But the grass was still wet from rain the night before. Noah's foot slipped just as it connected with the ball. The ball didn't fly toward Lucas. It veered off course, spinning back toward the porch where Ryan sat. Everything happened in a split second. The ball smacked into the beer case under Ryan's feet. Half-drunk beer can sprayed everywhere, soaking his clothes. Then the ball bounced up and hit Ryan square in the face. Ryan's scream echoed across the entire yard. It wasn't a sound of physical pain. It was the scream of someone who'd been pushed past their breaking point. All the losing bets, all the shame, and now being hit in the face by a football in front of everyone. Everything that had been building up inside him exploded in that one moment. Ryan jumped out of his chair, his bloodshot eyes sweeping the yard for someone to blame. Noah was still frozen in the middle of the lawn, his face white as a sheet. But Lucas had moved closer and was standing right in Ryan's line of sight. The boy didn't even realize what was about to happen. I saw Ryan charging toward my son. Without thinking, I threw open the kitchen window and jumped out. The second my feet hit the ground, I started running toward the kids. But the distance from the kitchen window to the back porch was more than 35 feet. Just 35 feet. And I couldn't get there in time. Ryan's hand came down across Lucas's face. The slap echoed across the yard like a gunshot. Lucas flew backward and crashed into the corner of the porch's outdoor table. He fell onto the wooden deck and lay there, completely still. Blood dripped from a gash on my son's forehead, pooling on the porch floor drop by drop. Lucas's eyes were wide open, but he couldn't cry, couldn't speak. He was in shock. My legs kept pumping. My heart felt like it was going to explode. But before I could reach them, another scream cut through the air. Noah, the 9-year-old, sprinted onto the porch and threw himself between his father and his cousin. He grabbed Ryan's arm and cried out, "No, Dad. It wasn't him. I kicked the ball. It was my fault." Ryan turned to look at his own son, and in that moment, his face didn't look human anymore. He bared his teeth, glared at Noah, and hissed, "You're defending him? You made me lose face in front of all my friends." He grabbed Noah by the hair and yanked his head backward. Noah screamed in agony, his small hands clawing desperately at his father's grip, his voice strangled and broken. "Dad, it hurts. It hurts so bad." Ryan's friends had rushed out of the house, but they just stood there at the back door, frozen, watching. A bunch of grown men, just standing there, seeing a 9-year-old being brutalized by his own father, and not one of them moved or said a word. Dad came running out of the living room too. He stopped at the doorway, his face pale as a ghost when he saw what was happening. Ryan, the son he believed had changed, stood there like a stranger, a monster. Dad opened his mouth, but couldn't form any words. Maybe in that moment, he finally realized that the past 7 months had been nothing but a show, and he'd been the most gullible audience member of all. I charged onto the porch, just a few feet from Ryan now. I couldn't see my brother anymore. All I saw was a man who had just hurt 2 innocent children, a man I had given chance after chance, and he had stomped on every single one. My body moved before my brain could catch up. My left arm wrapped around Lucas, pulling him close. My right hand grabbed Noah's arm and yanked him toward me. At the same time, I drove my foot into Ryan's chest with every ounce of strength I had. He stumbled backward and let go of Noah's hair. The boy collapsed against me, trembling violently. I held both kids tight in my arms and backed away from Ryan. Claire appeared seconds later. She rushed over, dropped to her knees, and took Lucas from my arms. Her eyes went red the moment she saw the blood on his forehead, but her voice stayed calm and steady. "Lucas, look at me. Can you hear me?" The boy blinked a few times, his lips moving, whispering, "Mom, it hurts. It hurts so much." Hearing my son say those words, I felt like someone was crushing my chest. My boy was lying there bleeding, and I hadn't been able to protect him. Ryan was someone I had trusted. I had brought my son into this house. Noah was still clinging to me, his face buried in my chest, his whole body shaking. Claire reached out and pulled him close too, holding both children in her arms. Noah looked up at his aunt, tears streaming down his face, his voice breaking on every syllable. "Aunt Claire, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to help Lucas." Claire cradled Lucas with one arm and stroked Noah's hair with the other. Her voice was soft but fierce. "Listen to me. You did nothing wrong. Nobody can blame you. Do you understand me?" Ryan's snarl from behind made me turn around. He was back on his feet, his face a mottled purple red, pointing at the children and shouting, "Look at this. They're putting on an act." Noah kicked the ball at my face. "I'm the victim here." I stepped right up to him, my fists clenched so tight my knuckles went white. My voice dropped to a level so cold I barely recognized it. "You're 35 years old. You just hit an 11-year-old kid. He's bleeding from his head. You just yanked your own 9-year-old son by the hair, and now you're standing here claiming to be the victim?" Ryan took a step back, but his mouth wouldn't stop. "I'm in therapy. I just lost control for a second." I cut him off, my voice like a blade. "The whole family believed you had changed. And this is what change looks like." Dad came down from the porch, walking quickly toward us. He raised both hands, his voice shaky but trying to sound firm. "Enough. Both of you stop. We can work this out." I didn't even look at him. I said clearly to Claire, "Take both kids to the car right now. Both Lucas and Noah. Drive straight to Children's Hospital on Colorado Boulevard. Don't stop for anything." Claire nodded, helped both boys to their feet, and hurried toward the car. Noah took a few steps, then stopped and turned back to look at his father one last time. I will never forget the look in that boy's eyes. Half terror, half emptiness. Like a child who had just lost something he could never get back. Ryan saw his son walking away. He surged forward, yelling, "Stop! You have no right to take my boy anywhere." I stepped in front of him, one palm pressing hard against his chest, my words grinding out between my teeth. "Your son? You think you deserve to call him your son?" Dad rushed over and grabbed my arm, pleading, "Ethan, he's your brother. He's trying to get better. Everyone makes mistakes sometimes. You can't." I yanked my arm free and turned to stare directly into Dad's eyes. My rage was boiling, but my voice came out cold as ice. "Getting better? Your grandson is bleeding over there. Is that what recovery looks like to you? You convinced the whole family that Ryan had changed. So what do you call this?" Dad opened his mouth, then closed it. Not one word came out. He stood there, his shoulders sinking. I turned back, grabbed Ryan by the collar, and pulled him close to my face. My voice dropped dangerously low. "You're coming with me to the garage. Right now." He struggled, tried to pull away, but I held on tighter. I dragged him across the grass toward the garage. His friends stood there in silence, like they'd lost the ability to speak. Dad stood frozen like a shadow. Nobody dared to move. I shoved Ryan inside and slammed the door shut behind us. I won't tell you exactly what happened in the next 5 minutes. Some things don't need words. Just know that when that garage door opened again, Ryan was lying on the concrete floor. And for the first time in his life, he understood what it felt like to be the weaker one. Before I unlocked the door to leave, I looked down at him, curled up on the cold concrete. I crouched down and spoke in a low, quiet voice. "You should feel grateful. Grateful that I stopped. Grateful that I'm letting you walk out of here on your own 2 feet." He didn't respond. Just lay there, breathing heavily. I stood up, gave him one last look, and said, "But if you ever touch Lucas or Noah again, even one hair on their heads, I won't stop. Do you understand?" Ryan nodded, his eyes still fixed on the floor, refusing to look at me. I opened the garage door. After the darkness, the afternoon sunlight felt blinding. I walked outside, sweat forming on my forehead, both hands throbbing and trembling. Not from fear. From the effort it took to control myself and stop when I did. Dad stood at the doorway, his face pale as if he'd seen a ghost. He looked at me, then peered into the garage, his voice quivering. "Ethan, what did you do in there?" I didn't answer. I walked right past him. Ryan's friends were huddled on the house porch. One of them was holding his phone, stammering like he was thinking about calling the police. I stopped and stared directly into each of their eyes. At 6 feet 1 inch and about 195 pounds, after more than 25 years of hitting the gym and running, I knew exactly how I looked in that moment. I said, low and dangerous, get out. All of you. Get out before I change my mind. The guy with the phone swallowed hard and shoved it back in his pocket. Dad ran after me, grabbed my arm again, yelling, Ethan, I'm asking you, what did you do to him? I stopped, turned, and looked him dead in the eye. My voice was ice cold. Go look in the garage yourself. Don't ask me. I yanked my arm free and walked straight to my car. I didn't look back. I didn't say goodbye. Behind me was Dad's house, my brother lying in the garage with a broken nose, and all the illusions about family that I had tried so hard to hold on to. Ahead of me was the children's hospital, where my wife was waiting with 2 children, my son and my nephew. When I got to the hospital about 25 minutes after Claire, Lucas was already lying on a bed with his forehead neatly bandaged. Claire sat beside him, one hand holding my son's hand, one arm wrapped around Noah's shoulders. The boy sat completely still, eyes fixed on the floor, his hand gripping his cousin's and refusing to let go. Dr. Harris, the attending physician, came out to speak with me. She said Lucas needed 6 stitches, but there were no signs of any brain injury. I breathed a sigh of relief. But then she said something that made me freeze. She glanced at Noah, then pulled me aside to a quiet corner of the room. Her voice dropped low. Mr. Miller, I want to ask you about the other boy. When the nurse approached him, he curled up and raised his hands to cover his face. That's a reflex we see in children who are used to being hit. I'd recommend we examine him. I nodded, and what they found made my blood boil all over again. Multiple bruises covered Noah's back and arms. They were in different stages of healing. Some had already turned yellow, almost faded. Others were still purple and black, only a few days old. Dr. Harris looked at me, her voice heavy. This isn't from today. This child has been enduring this for a long time. By law, we're required to report this to the police. I called Noah's mother, Amanda, right away. She and Ryan had divorced 3 years ago. Noah lived primarily with his mom, but had to spend weekends at his father's house because of a court order. When Amanda heard what had happened, she broke down sobbing on the phone. I knew something wasn't right. I saw bruises on my son, but every time I asked, he said he fell playing football. I suspected, but he wouldn't tell me the truth. The court needed direct testimony from him, but Noah kept protecting his father. I couldn't do anything. Her voice cracked completely. He's scared. He's scared that if he tells the truth, his father will make it worse. I understood. A 9-year-old boy, trapped between fear and love for the man who brought him into this world. Amanda drove to the hospital that night. When she walked into the room, Noah saw his mother and finally cried out loud for the first time. She rushed over and held him tight, tears soaking through his shirt. Noah buried his face in her chest, his voice shaking. Mom, do I have to go back to Dad's house anymore? Amanda hugged him even tighter, kissed the top of his head, and said, never again. I promise you. Around 1 a.m, the police arrived to take statements. I told them everything, including what happened in the garage. The officer finished writing, looked up at me, and asked, Mr. Miller, do you regret what you did? I said, I regret believing he had changed. I regret bringing my son there. As for what happened in the garage, no. Ryan was arrested that night on charges of injuring 2 child victims. I received a warning for my actions in the garage, but was given leniency because I had been protecting children in an emergency situation. The next morning, Dad called. His voice was cold as ice. Are you satisfied now? Your brother's been arrested. You destroyed this family. I answered through the phone, my voice steady and unwavering. Have you seen Noah's medical records from the past 7 months? You said Ryan had changed. During those 7 months, your grandson was still being beaten regularly. Did you ever ask the kid a single question? Did you ever really look at him? There was a long, heavy silence. I continued, I didn't think so. Goodbye, Dad. And I hung up. That night, Lucas lay next to me on the hospital bed. He turned over, his voice small and confused. Dad, Noah used to tell me he was scared to go home to Uncle Ryan. But I thought Uncle was better now, because Grandpa said so. Why did Grandpa lie, Dad? I held my son close, my throat so tight I could barely breathe. I didn't know how to answer him. An 11-year-old had seen the truth that all of us adults had chosen to ignore. 4 months later, I sat in the Denver County courtroom and watched my brother walk in wearing an orange prison uniform. Those months of waiting for the trial weren't easy. Lucas had to see a psychologist twice a month because he kept having nightmares and would jump at any loud noise. The scar on his forehead was healing, but the wounds in his mind needed much more time. Amanda had been bringing Noah to the same clinic. One afternoon when I took Lucas there for his appointment, the two boys saw each other in the waiting room. They sat down side by side like it was the most natural thing in the world. Two kids, sharing a pain that adults had caused. Ryan sat in the defendant's row, his head bowed, not daring to look at anyone. Dad called me several times during those 4 months, begging me to drop the charges, to reconsider, to give Ryan another chance. I wasn't stupid enough to fall for it again. The courtroom was cold and silent. The prosecutors stood to present the charges, bringing out Noah's medical records and projecting images of the bruises on the boy's back and arms onto a screen. Dad sat in the row behind Ryan, looking like he'd aged a decade. His hair was grayer, his back more hunched, his eyes empty. I sat next to Claire. Amanda sat in the row beside us. The prosecutor's voice was clear and measured. The injuries on victim Noah Miller are at different stages of healing, indicating that this pattern of abuse continued for months. This was not an isolated incident. This was systematic abuse. The defense attorney stood up, trying to turn the tables. He pointed at me and said loudly, "Your Honor, my client was attacked first. His own brother assaulted him right there in their father's garage." The prosecutor didn't flinch. He turned to face the defense attorney and responded calmly, "Attacked first? By whom? By a 9-year-old who slipped while kicking a football? And your client's reaction was to strike an 11-year-old so hard he bled from his head, then grab his own son by the hair. That's the result of 7 months of therapy." The defense attorney had nothing to say. Then came Noah's testimony. Because of his age, the boy was allowed to give his statement through a pre-recorded video. The screen showed Noah sitting in a room with a social worker beside him. His voice trembled, but every word was clear. Dad told me I couldn't tell anyone. Noah's eyes stayed fixed on the floor. Dad would hurt me when he lost his bets, even when he was supposed to be getting better. That day, Dad hit my cousin and made him bleed. I was so scared. I just wanted to save him. Then Dad grabbed my hair. I heard Amanda crying softly. Claire gripped my hand tightly. I looked across the room at Ryan. He had buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. The judge spoke in a severe voice. "Does the defendant have anything to say?" Ryan looked up, his voice stammering. I have problems controlling my emotions. I'm trying." The judge cut him off, his voice sharp and hard. "During those 7 months of trying, your son continued to get hurt. Where exactly was your effort?" Ryan couldn't answer. The verdict came down. Ryan Miller was found guilty of injuring 2 children, with aggravating circumstances for prolonged abuse and violation of family trust. He was sentenced to 30 months in prison, mandatory supervised therapy after release, permanent loss of custody rights, and a restraining order prohibiting any contact with both victims. Ryan was handcuffed. Before they led him away, he turned to look at Dad one last time. His eyes seemed to want to say something, but no words came out. Dad sat there, tears streaming down his face. In my entire life, I had never seen him cry like that. After the trial ended, Dad walked up to me. His eyes were red and swollen. "Are you satisfied now?" I stood up, faced him, and said, "Very satisfied." Then I walked out of the courthouse with Claire. When we got to the car, she turned to me and asked gently, "Are you okay?" I looked out the window at the parking lot. Dad was standing alone next to his old car, his shoulders slumped, looking half his size. I turned back to Claire and said, "I lost a brother today. Not because he went to prison, but because I finally realized I never really had that brother to begin with. It's been 9 months since Ryan went to prison. I haven't visited him once. Our lives are quieter now, smaller, with fewer people in them, but so much more peaceful. Lucas has healed completely. The scar on his forehead is fading with time. The nightmares became less frequent, then stopped altogether. My son is back to being the carefree 11-year-old I remember. Noah lives full-time with Amanda now. He doesn't have to count down the days until he goes to his dad's house anymore. He doesn't have to hide bruises under long sleeves. He doesn't have to lie about falling down. Every weekend, Amanda brings Noah over to our house to play with Lucas. The two boys run around like they're attached at the hip from morning until night. Yesterday, I stood on the back porch, a steaming cup of coffee in my hand, watching the two kids throw snowballs at each other. Denver had just gotten hit with a huge blizzard after Christmas, and the whole yard was blanketed in white. Claire came outside, pulled on a sweater, and stood next to me. She watched the kids roll around in the snow, building a lopsided snowman. Then she turned to me with a soft smile. You see? Kids are stronger than we think. Noah is completely different from 9 months ago. He laughs more, talks more. He plays like a normal 9-year-old should. I nodded, but didn't say anything. Dad still texts me almost every day, begging to see his grandchildren, asking to talk, pleading for another chance. I don't respond. I don't know what else there is to say. Someone asked me recently, don't you miss your dad? Your brother? I looked through the window at Claire, who was making dinner inside. Then I looked out at the yard, where Lucas and Noah were laughing and pelting each other with snow. I said, my family is right here. A family is made up of people who protect each other, not people who hurt each other and then ask for forgiveness just because they shared DNA. Noah came running up onto the porch, his face red from the cold, a handful of snow clutched in his mittens. Uncle Ethan, come build a snowman with us. We need a grown-up to carry the big snowballs. I laughed, set down my coffee, and told him, all right, but I'm terrible at building snowmen, you know. Noah grinned from ear to ear, snow falling from his fingers everywhere. That's okay, Uncle. I'll teach you. I laughed again and walked out into the yard with the kids, my boots crunching on the soft white snow. I don't know if every choice I made was the right one, but when I see Lucas and Noah smiling together like that, I know one thing for certain, and it's the thing I want to share with you through this story. Some people never change, no matter how good they get at pretending. And there are things far more important than trying to hold together a family that only exists on paper. If there's anything I've learned from all of this, it's 2 things. First, don't let your desperate hope that someone will change blind you to the warning signs. I know everyone wants to believe their family members can get better. Dad wanted to believe it. I tried to believe it too. But looking back, we all missed so many obvious signs. Ryan was still constantly checking his phone. He started drinking the moment a friend pushed a beer into his hand. He had that same explosive reaction when things didn't go his way. The warning signs were there. We just didn't want to see them. Second, I need to be honest with you about what happened in that garage. I used violence against my brother. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you I regret it, because in that moment, all I could see was blood on my son's forehead and my nephew's terrified screams. But I need you to understand something. It wasn't the right way to handle it. If you ever find yourself in a similar situation, call the police. Get the victims to safety. Let the law deal with the abuser. I was lucky to receive leniency because I was protecting children in an emergency. But things could have gone very differently. I could have been charged. I could have lost custody of my own son. I could have gone from protector to defendant in the blink of an eye. Don't do what I did. Violence creates more violence. And you won't always be as fortunate as I was. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it meant something to you.